of key findings, I think number one would probably be just the diversity of the victims that were involved with this data set. Every year we study, of course, lots of different breaches around the world. And this one really surprised me at the size range of organizations involved. We saw a large number of very small organizations in the 10 to 100 employee range. But we also saw a large sample of very large organizations as well, with over 100,000 employees. So, and as far as the industries involved, we saw utilities and financial services and restaurants and retailers and governments. So one of the things we came away from after looking at this is just the fact that there really is no size or kind of organization that can just say data breach is not going to happen to me. I think it's pretty compelling in that way. Other key findings, 4 out of 5 in-network intrusions involve weak or stolen credentials, I think is really key to understanding how attackers gain access to networks. Saw a higher level of targeted attacks, that's important. And several other things just in the realm of which industries are most targeted and how these attacks happen. It's almost hard to say what the key findings are most important, because it's really different if you look at retail versus finance, and if you look at government entities versus restaurants. You see different things pop out in each of those areas. This report does indeed show many more state-affiliated espionage intrusions that we tied back to that kind of activity this year. I don't think that increase is necessarily an increase in that activity around the world, although I do think there is an increase as more countries go online, and it's becoming the way countries conduct espionage. So I do think there is an upward trend in that. The original question was about, if those kinds of attacks are on the rise and we're spending a lot of money, then our money is not effective. But I actually think that it is showing that some of those spendings are in fact effective, because we were able to at least identify more of that kind of activity than, say, a couple of years ago, when this was largely misunderstood and there wasn't a lot of intelligence that allowed us to see that. So in many cases, that increase, even though it seems counterintuitive, was because of better intelligence, because of spending and research and all of these things that's going on all around the world and in many different companies. There is a sense, and many times, not to go forward with the details about a security incident if one happens. So I think that's across many different industries, but particularly in the financial services sector. But there is an aspect to this, and I think you mentioned it about we're getting to a point, I think, where there is, I don't know if acceptance is the right word, but we've seen so many breaches. Consumers they've experienced this a few times, maybe where their account had fraud, or a payment card had to be canceled, or something like this. So I think there's more awareness there, and maybe, I don't know if I want to use the word forgiving, but I think some of that is a greater understanding that can allow companies to report these incidents and be truthful and say that, hey, we had this, we're doing these things about it. And that can lead to increased customer awareness and loyalty and things like that. I mean, we've tried to follow studies that are associating a security incident with brand damage. And those studies seem to suggest that consumers tolerate an incident if it's handled well and the company is forthright and here's what happened and what we're doing about it. And there's usually just maybe a short-term dip in lack of trust or market stock prices and things like that, but then it returns to normal. The example I always like to use is Italy. Maybe we've worked an incident in Italy before, I can't quite remember, but I don't remember very many of them. But it's because they're illegal. It's illegal to have a data breach. So not surprisingly, nobody reports it, and they get worked less or that worked by a certain set of organizations. And of course, it's different around the world. Just in Australia recently, and they're dealing with should mandatory breach reporting be enacted and things like that. India's got its own set of laws. Europe is struggling with what to do there. The U.S. has had breach laws in many states. So these things certainly matter. It tends to be when those laws are enacted, there's an increase in reported incidents, which again seems kind of counterintuitive. You would think, oh no, there's more incidents. But really what you're seeing is just that's been going on the entire time. But now they have to be reported. And in general, I think the security industry is especially challenged with a lack of information. And so, if reporting is done well and done right, it should result in greater awareness. And it should help the public and help companies know, well, these kinds of things are happening. And therefore, I need to do X, Y, and Z to prepare for it and to defend against these things. And I think the overall result is a positive. It's a good point. You wonder, are we as defenders as passionate? And I think it depends on what sector you look at. I really, really, really enjoy studying data breaches and picking them apart and publishing what we find. And the team that I work with at Verizon really enjoys that, and we're passionate about it. And I've seen people that are really, really passionate about firewalls, which sometimes surprises me and things like that. So you do meet some in the security space that really like what they do. They enjoy it. Pen testers are kind of a lot that they get excited about it. So I think it's almost like any other job. There's people that are doing it just to make money. A lot of times they're not going to show that kind of passion. But then you have some that really enjoy what they do every day. And that comes out, and I think they're better for it. But I do think in the security space, we can encourage that kind of passion. We can make security not just about a bunch of rules to follow and checklists and almost take all the creativity out of it, where the security person's job is just a yes, 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 but really take good ideas and new ideas, because the defenders need all the help we can get. I mean, the attackers are creating new methods and using them against us, and we're always trying to keep up. So passion will help us keep up. I personally am very much a fan of employee education and awareness. I've talked to many who just think it's not very useful because employees are going to do things no matter what you tell them. And I think that's kind of like saying, well, criminals are going to do things no matter what we tell them, so we might as well not buy any security controls or have any processes in place. So, at the same time, I think the core there is that humans are humans, and no matter how much you train them, they're still going to click on suspicious emails, and they're still going to make mistakes that have security ramifications. But nevertheless, I think setting at the top, especially at the C level, that security is something that the business is going to do. It's not just we're going to run a training thing where you have a web-based training thing that you have to do once every year, and then nobody ever talks about security anymore the rest of the year. That's not really educating users. That's not really setting the tone at the top that this is going to be a security organization. Helping them understand that it's not just something that may happen one day and kind of like a fairy tale, but the reality of the situation is that attacks on the internet are constant. As soon as you plug in a computer, that becomes a target, and it will have attacks. You will absolutely receive emails that are fraudulent. You will have malware. Your web browsing practices make a difference in the security for the entire company, because we've seen it time and time again where one user's desktop is the gateway into the internal network, and the attackers spread throughout the rest of the company. So I think that's another key thing, is to help users understand that truly they are part of the line of defense for the entire company, and making it real like that. And typically that'll get some buy-in. Interestingly, I've often seen that it's the the C-levels that are the leading cause of the shift to BYOD, because they want to use their tablets at work just like they do at home. So I've met countless organizations that movement has actually started at the top, which is different to a lot of other technologies that kind of start at the bottom and finally C-level buys in. But regardless of where it stops, it is a difficult thing, because in security, we've trained ourselves since the beginning of this industry that we need to maintain control of devices. That's one of the ways that we ensure security is through control. And I think we've got to change that model, to be quite honest. And BYOD is a way of doing business that is going to force us to change. So we've got to shift our focus from the device to what we're really concerned about is the data on the device, right? Or the connectivity of the device. And so if our concern is the data on the device, you have options there to even if the physical device itself is compromised, well, you have technologies that lock the data in a little secured off piece of the device, and it can wipe on certain circumstances and things like that. So we've got to shift the control to avoid that kind of disaster. But I think some of these trends are just inevitable, like BYOD, and it could be a very good thing, right? Because that is less expense. If we do get to a day where we no longer have to buy devices, that's a cost saving. Things tend to change relatively slowly, so I'll say that. That's important to note, because a lot of times we say that it's constantly changing and all that kind of thing, and I'm not so sure that it is constantly changing. We do see changes, no doubt, but we continue to see the organized criminal space and the activist groups, and then your more state-affiliated threat groups. They're evolving over time. So you saw activist groups, for instance, make a good example. When you looked at 2011, they were very much focused on stealing data and then immediately releasing it to embarrass their targets. That was the way that they worked in 2011, back when you had Anonymous and LulzSec at the height of what they were doing. If you look at 2012, you saw some of that, but really the thing that those groups were doing in 2012 and still now are denial of service attacks. It's our distributed denial of service attacks. So it shifted in that direction a little bit. Organized criminal groups took from several years ago, 2008, 2009, were targeting larger financial institutions and stealing huge amounts of data. And you had some very, very public and prominent incidents there. And a lot of those people that were behind them were put in jail. And I think you saw those groups shift because of that to your smaller businesses, because those were easier and softer targets. And I think we've seen maybe the start of a shift back in the past 6 months or year, to where they're still targeting small to medium businesses, but we're also seeing more and more attacks against larger financials as well. So it'll be interesting to see if that continues. And then on the state affiliated, the more espionage space, the tactics have been fairly static, but I'm personally interested to see how they respond to the increased intelligence sharing that's going on as they are being tracked more and more. So they are finding it more difficult to, for instance, have a command and control node on the internet with just a domain or an IP address and operate from that IP address for 6 months to a year against hundreds of organizations like they have been in the past few years, just because those organizations are now talking. So that IP address or domain gets labeled as bad, and they have to shift. So it'll be interesting to see how that changes methods. And but malware, I always watch the malware space to see how trends are going to go, whether it's commoditized reuse of existing code or whether it's a lot of new and sophisticated code. So those things are important. The identity and access management threats against that have been trending up over the past few years. I think that'll continue. It's very getting very difficult. If you think about the surface area of the modern organization with a number of devices and remote access connections and employees coming in and out, it's an area of weakness for most organizations around the world. So attacks have trended toward targeting that, and I think they'll continue to do it. So we'll see what the report says, but that's what the purpose is to understand how these things are moving over time and how they affect organizations of different sizes and types. And we think if we can better understand that, we can put better defenses out there that are logical and justified, and we'll get more value out of our money spent on security, which is the goal.